Please welcome a true solutionary, Zoe Weil.
Welcome, everybody. It is a thrill to see you all here today. You know, I really wasn't going to start crying right when I started talking. I figured it would probably, happen if it happened at all toward the end, but not right at the beginning. Thank you, Mina, for that introduction. And I want to describe to you how I fell into this work as a humane educator 25 years ago. And a number of you have heard this story before, but today is a day that it bears repeating. When I was in graduate school in 1987, I was looking for a summer job, and I heard about a program at the University of Pennsylvania that offered week-long courses to middle school students. So I called the director and I pitched 5 courses. And she said yes to all of them, which apparently she was doing to everybody because there were 60 courses offered that summer, and there weren't nearly enough students to fill all of them. Well, 3 of my 5 courses were humane education courses. One was on environmental issues, one was on animal issues, and one was on media literacy. Now, this may shock you, but the media literacy course did not have enough students sign up for it, and I have, for the life of me, never been able to figure out why 12 and 13-year-olds didn't want to learn how to watch television critically. However, of those 60 courses that were offered, the animal issues course was actually the second most popular, second only to robotics, which, because I was a Star Trek fan, I could appreciate. So that week, I watched in amazement as those students in that class were transformed. They changed their habits, their behaviors, their attitudes, their diets, and what they did in their free time. One boy learning about product testing on animals on Wednesday, in which soaps and oven cleaners and other products are dripped into the eyes of conscious rabbits and force-fed to them in quantities that kill and smeared onto animals' abraded skin. He went home that night and he made his own homemade leaflets. Now, this was in 1987. Middle school students did not have personal computers. When I say he made his own homemade leaflets, I mean that he hand wrote them, each one of them. And he came into class the next day and he asked if he could hand them out, and he didn't mean to his fellow classmates. No, he meant on a Philadelphia street corner at lunch. He had been so moved by what he had learned that very day he decided he wanted to make a difference by educating others. He had become a change maker overnight. Well, that was the summer that I realized that I'd found my life's work as a humane educator. Now, when I was in college, I had a friend who was a medical student. And one day he said to me that he thought that being a physician was the most noble profession. And I remember feeling a little tweaked when he said that, a little irritated. And I think part of that was because I'd actually gone to college pre-med and quickly abandoned the path, so now I wasn't living the most noble profession dream. But more than that, I thought it was really silly to rate professions based on their nobility. But the comment stuck with me for decades, and I found myself a couple years ago really reflecting on it. And I thought to myself that if pressed to answer the question, what is the most noble profession, I wouldn't hesitate to say that it is teaching. More than any other field or profession, educators hold the future in their hands. Will the future be bright? Will it be one that is just and peaceful and sustainable? The answer to that question will lie more with teachers than with any other professionals. Thoreau once said, "There are thousands hacking at the branches of evil, to one that is striking at the root." The education of children is the root system underlying all other systems. And while it is still critically important that we work to put out the fires of injustice and the fires of destruction and then the fires of cruelty, there is little that is more efficient and effective than preventing those problems to begin with, and education is prevention, and humane education, I believe, is the root solution to all of the challenges that we face in the world. I'm glad you agree. So what are those challenges? Well, there are global challenges. Between global warming and the potential loss of half of all species on Earth, and a growing population of over 7 billion people, each of whom needs access to adequate food and clean water, and economic opportunity, and a home and energy sources, and 1 billion of whom currently don't have access to adequate food and clean water. Things can look pretty grim. And then there is the shocking reality that we are brutally killing 1 trillion, and that is with a T, animals every year for food, mostly in the oceans that we are decimating. And then there's a problem that I've noticed recently, a creeping and insidious problem of cynicism and hopelessness among young people. Now, I've been a humane educator for a long time, and I've seen my share of cynical teenagers. But what I'm seeing now is something different. I am seeing cynical 5th graders. I am seeing hopeless 6th graders. A friend of mine who's a humane educator in Maine was working with some middle and high school students. Now, these were pretty privileged kids, and he asked them if they thought the future was going to get better. And not one of them thought the future was going to be better. Not one. Last year, I was giving some presentations at a private school in an affluent Connecticut community. And I was speaking to the 5th and 6th graders, and I asked them what they thought the biggest problems in the world were. And after they shared a list that was quite familiar, I asked them if they could imagine these problems being solved. And of the 40-plus kids in that classroom, only a handful raised their hand that they could even imagine that we could solve those problems. That's a big challenge. If youth cannot even imagine that we can solve the problems we face, why on earth would they even participate in trying? So, how are we going to meet these challenges? Well, the first thing we need to do is recognize and tell everybody we know that despite these challenges, never before in recorded human history have we lived in less violent, less discriminatory, or less cruel times. Now, many of you in this room may be thinking, I don't believe that's true. And so I invite you to do the research for yourself. You might want to start with Harvard scientist Steven Pinker's painstakingly researched book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, to find out whether what I just said is true. I've done enough research that I firmly believe that it is true. And while we do face potential looming catastrophes, never before in recorded human history have we had the capacity to communicate instantaneously and collaborate with people across every border to solve them. We need to tell our children that despite the problems that we face and all of the bad news that inundates them daily and the creeping cynicism that's so easy to cultivate, that the truth is that they have opportunities to create change, that they have longer lifespans, that they have the capacity to solve problems, that they have the growing body of human knowledge in a little handheld device that fits in their pocket so that they can work to solve these problems and that they have freedoms that are unimagined by generations before them, and most importantly, that they matter. We need to tell them stories about their peers who are creating change, to enthuse and ignite their engagement too. Stories about young people like Nikhil Goyal, who you will hear this morning, who is an educational change maker. Stories like the story of Dylan Mahalingam, who lives in New Hampshire and whose youth organization has mobilized 3 million kids around the world to work on the UN's Millennium Development Goals. We need to tell them stories about children like Arti Verma, who lives in a community in India and became so distressed about the insidious and continuing and unjust caste system that she created a massive educational campaign so that now in her community, lower caste children are going to school alongside their upper caste peers, and their parents are finally able to find employment in a community where they were previously shunned. Finally, and most importantly, we need to embrace and promote a bigger purpose for schooling than the one that exists today. Now, okay, please clap for that. If you go to the United States Department of Education website and you click on the mission statement, you will read this, that the mission of the United States Department of Education is to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness. Really? Is that good enough? Is that good enough given the problems that we face in the world? Is that worthy of our children's great minds and their big hearts and their threatened future? I don't think so. It's simply not a big enough goal for our kids and for our world. What we believe at the Institute for Humane Education is that the goal for schooling should be to provide all students with the knowledge and the tools and the motivation to be solutionaries for a better world for all people, all species, and for the ecosystems which sustain all life. If we don't embrace that kind of purpose for education, what is the likely outcome of our current purpose of preparing students for global competitiveness? The likely outcome is that our graduates will simply perpetuate and may even escalate the global problems that we face. So what should schooling look like? What should all education look like? Well, the core competencies of verbal and mathematical and scientific literacy ought to serve the goals of creating a just, peaceful, and sustainable future. They shouldn't be just ends in themselves. We need to see solutionary schools proliferate. And this afternoon, you're going to get to hear from several of our students in our graduate program who are working to launch the very first solutionary school right here in New York City. We need to see solutionary teams replacing debate teams. And guess what? This afternoon, you're going to get to hear from David Sidwell, who's here from Utah, where last spring he launched the first solutionary teams and held the first solutionary Congress, which together we are now going to bring national. We need to have multidisciplinary learning that is focused on core topics like food and water, and security and protection, and energy, and transportation, and buildings and production. We can't live without those things, but we need to learn how to produce all of them sustainably and ethically. What better place to do that within our classrooms? And finally, we need most of all for education to be ensuring that students are passionate, lifelong learners. We are living in times where information is coming at us so quickly, and the body of human knowledge is growing so fast that it no longer makes sense for us to think of education as the imparting or the giving of a certain body of knowledge. What our students need to be able to do is to inquire for the rest of their lives. Our students need to be able to think critically and creatively. Our students need to be able to collaborate, to work together. They need to be able to find knowledge for themselves and have the tools to do so that they can distinguish opinion from fact and truth from fiction and false information from true information and pseudoscience from real science. They need those skills more than anything else so that they will, for the rest of their lives, employ what I like to call the 3 I's of inquiry, introspection, and integrity. Inquiry, so that they ask always about the effects of their choices. Introspection, so that they inquire about the place where their values and the new information that they are acquiring meet, so that they can live with integrity, so that they can walk their talk, so that they can live according to their values. That needs to be what happens in every educational setting. Now, not only would this sort of education be effective and lead to a generation able to solve our grave challenges, however, that would also be the greatest gift for all of us in this room to be able to impart. There is little in this world that I have found that is as heartening and rewarding and exciting as being a humane educator. Here's what happens when you're a humane educator, when you inspire others to examine their deepest values and live accordingly, when you provide them with the tools for inquiry and knowledge so that they can make informed choices, when you ignite their curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking capacities, and when you help them to become solutionaries. You watch the light go on in eyes that have been dulled. You see enthusiasm take hold and problems get solved. You watch the infectious passion for learning and doing good in the world spread like wildfire. And sometimes you find out that a course that you taught changed somebody's life. And sometimes you get a letter like the one I'm about to read to you. Spending that week with you was the most inspiring 5 days of my life so far. You made me realize just how much one person can do to help the world and how much more you can do by educating others. I've already started teaching my parents. It really feels good to know that I can take sometimes simple and sometimes complex actions to save a life and our world. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I will carry that week with me for a lifetime. So, when you get letters like that, allow yourself to feel good for 5 or 10 minutes, and then recognize that letter for the message it really sends, which isn't very good. That letter to me is more a reflection of the failures of education than it is a reflection on how good we humane educators may be at our job. Because truthfully, spending a week with any of us should not be the highlight of any teenager's life. That girl's whole education should have been inspiring. All of her teachers should be humane educators, infusing their curricula with relevancy and meaning for today's world, no matter what subjects they teach, so that no child ever doubts for a moment that they have the capacity and the responsibility to contribute to a better world. Now, in the mid-1990s, after I'd been a humane educator for about a decade, and I'd witnessed its tremendous power to create change, I realized how important it was that there were more of us. So in co-founding the Institute for Humane Education, our goal was to give other people the tools that the handful of us comprehensive humane educators had acquired. And so we launched the first certificate and graduate programs in humane education. We started doing workshops all across the US and Canada. We later began offering online courses and have free downloadable activities, hundreds of them, on our website to help this movement grow. And indeed, this movement has grown. And I believe that today will mark a turning point in the humane education movement when a comprehensive humane education conference was offered at NYU on the International Day of Peace and sold out by the early registration deadline so that a room twice the size had to be secured and then sold out again, with people from all across the US and Canada and from the farthest points around the globe all coming together to bring this growing field of study, this growing educational movement to a tipping point. I believe that today is going to mark that tipping point. And those of us who have been humane educators for decades as visiting teachers and after-school instructors and camp counselors and educators at nonprofits are now joined by teachers in classrooms around the globe, by professors in colleges everywhere, by educational changemakers, by school administrators, by parents, even by legislators who now believe, as we have believed for many years, that educating a generation of solutionaries must become the very purpose of education. And I think we will look back on today and realize that this was the moment when the movement to ensure that every teacher was a humane educator and every institution of learning infused their curricula with relevancy and meaning for a changing world. One day soon, I actually hope that the term humane education will become obsolete because being an educator will become synonymous with being a humane educator. That everyone who teaches, whether in a classroom, as a college professor, in a boardroom, as a parent, as a mentor, as a politician, as a change maker or activist or business professional or healer, or working through the arts, everyone will impart the knowledge and the tools and the motivation so that others can become the solutionaries that they were meant to be. So I would like to close with a visualization that I often do. Some of you have done this with me before. And it's a visualization that actually came to my rescue in that Connecticut 5th and 6th grade classroom last year. After the students said that they could not imagine how we could solve our problems, I did this visualization with them and then I asked them again. And this time, virtually all of them could not only imagine that we could solve our problems, but they understood that they had a role to play. And so I invite you to close your eyes and sit comfortably in your seat and take a few deep breaths on this beautiful September day. And I would like you to imagine that you are very, very old, having lived a very long life. And I would like you to imagine yourself going to your favorite park, sitting at your favorite park bench, and breathing the clean air on a beautiful day. The air is clean because by this point in your life, we have restored the ecosystems that we had previously been polluting. In this future, nobody lives in poverty. Nobody goes to bed hungry or without water because they had no choice. In this future, we still have conflicts. We're still human. We still have foibles and prejudices, but we no longer act on them. We no longer resort to violence to solve our conflicts. And in this future, we treat other species with respect, with compassion, and with kindness. It's not a perfect world, but we've come a very, very long way. While you're sitting there, a young child comes up and sits down next to you and starts to talk to you. This child has been studying history in school and learning about much darker times, times when we polluted our world, times when we treated each other and other species with violence and cruelty and injustice. And this child is trying to understand how things changed and is asking you all sorts of questions. Finally, this child asks you a last question. What did you do to help bring about this better world? The child asks you. What role did you play? How would you like to be able to answer that child? What will you say you did? Now please open your eyes and go out and do whatever it is that you said to that child, and ponder that question today and hopefully for the rest of your life. I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you are all here. I feel as I look out at all of you that I am watching a dream I have had for 25 years come true. Thank you all so very much.